Alright, perfect. Hey everyone, my name is Paolo Ruggiero, and I am the author of Upheaval, Part 1 in the Liberation of Zubare. And today, let's see, we've already read the prologue, and that is on YouTube if you missed it live. In my profile, there's a link. You just, click that link and then click the YouTube button, take you right to the channel. You'll be able to watch the prologue get read live. I'll be uploading this as well. We're going to do probably chapters 1, 2, and 3. We'll see how long it takes. I try to keep these to about 20 to 30 minutes. That way, it doesn't take up too much of your day. So we'll see how long we go for here. But we're going to start with chapter 1. So chapter 1. The sun rose north. Okay, I'm gonna start over. The sun rose in the north, and Musashi still had not returned from the events of the prior evening. Miami was already in the fields on Greca Farm harvesting their crop, a pitiful and pathetic-looking grain that didn't even yield half of their imposed tribute to the general. He was short, impeccably fit man, with dark hair, and his eyes were dark from the things they had seen. The sun no longer burned his darkened skin, even during the hottest and harshest summer months. His hands no longer felt the sting of the rough gray stalks, prickly and thorned, and with blades of sharp grass surrounding them. The farmers used the grass to prevent other wildlife from devouring their crop, but this also made for a painful harvest, until one's hands became calloused from years of handling it. Miami looked down at his leathery hands and reminisced about his childhood, the one he spent learning and hiding, the one he spent training and killing and maiming, the one he spent fighting the cutthroats and following his leader's vision of freedom, the one taken from him, the one he lost. Freedom indeed, he muttered, as his sickle found another few stalks of grain, and he pulled, slicing through them. Freedom. He laughed at the sound of the word. It sounded foreign to his ears, elusive, like a dream he'd had over and over but could never remember. He looked up toward the north where the sun was rising over their old, dilapidated barn house and squinted in the sunlight. His skin felt the warmth of its rays, but it penetrated him no further, his soul remaining cold and bleak as it had been for too many years. He threw the small sheaf of grain stalks onto the meager pile in the wheelbarrow next to him and kept moving, kept slicing, kept piling it. His back no longer felt the pain of exhaustion from the routine, and his legs were used to the squatting. The wheelbarrow reflected the state of his thoughts, old and fading paint, worn down with a cracked handle and a rusted barrel. He wheeled it down the pathway and around their rickety log fence to another patch of crop. Great. Eaten again. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Now not even the blade grass is working. How are we supposed to help other farms pay their tribute when we can't even pay our own? He squatted down and studied the half-eaten plants and shook his head. He pulled them out by their roots, which were just as dinky and pathetic as the grain that grew from them. A slight breeze whipped through the farmland, and the unharvested crops swayed in its influence. He watched them move lazily back and forth, and a small part of him wished he were just a crop, his only concern being to flow in the light breeze and drink the cool rainwater until he was harvested. A few sheaves flew off the wheelbarrow and were carried away in the breeze, but he didn't even look. He just stared at the fields before him as his mind continued to wander. What had become of Musashi and the other senior members? When would they return? Would they return at all? And if they didn't, what would become of the farm? Was he enough? Could he pick up the mantle Musashi would leave behind and lead the coalition to victory? What of the kids and their lives? How much longer would they all have to suffer? A noise jolted him from his thoughts. The sound of 30 sets of armor, swords, shields, and horses all clanging and clamoring up the road to the main house. He recognized the sound all too well, and he knew what it brought. Cutthroats, and plenty of them. He peered across the fields to the far end of the farm, and sure enough, there was an entire battalion approaching from the main road. The rising sun gleamed off their silver armor, and the ruby goose, the general's symbol, pierced through the dissipating fog. Great. More issues. What do they want? Just as he was trained, he slipped into the brush and disappeared from sight. The soldiers stopped at the intersection just before the Greca farm, and he heard their commanding officer shout some orders. He watched through the swaying grain as a small group broke off here and there and followed the dirt paths to the surrounding farms. Miami sighed and shook his head again, as he was prone to do, and watched the rest of the group get smaller but closer. He waited and watched through the wooden log fence as they slowly progressed up the road to the house. He was in no position to do anything about their advance, while only armed with a dull sickle, nor could he get a message to the farmhouse without being detected. What he could do, however, was swiftly and silently sneak through the fields to the barn, and that's exactly what he did. The old dilapidated building that greeted him stood on faith alone, and Miami often wondered who built it and how it still stood today. A haphazard, faded yellow splotch brought to mind one of his fondest memories. Painting the barn with his seniors, Gruel and Kara, he missed them, and as their faces flashed through his mind, he just couldn't shake the feeling he'd never see them again. He allowed the splotch to take him back in time. They were laughing and playing outside the barn. He must have been 6 or 7 years old, not yet old enough to be sent out on missions with them, although he desperately wanted that. Gruel didn't speak much back then, but Kara spoke to him softly. She had short blonde hair and purple eyes. Miami wouldn't ever forget those deep violet eyes as they looked straight through his, and even now his heart skipped a beat at the memory. Gruel had thrown some yellow paint over their freshly painted brown, and Kara was scolding him, though not seriously. Miami, on the other hand, was furious. He and Kara had spent all day on that paint, and Gruel just sprayed it with yellow like it didn't matter. Gruel gave them a half smile like he always did, and the young Miami chased him around the barn, though he never could catch him. As the vision faded, the sound of Kara's laughter still filled his ears. He trudged through the weeds to the other side of the barn and found the doorway, leaning and missing an actual door. A beam that had fallen during a long since past storm was blocking his path, but luckily he was thin enough to fit, with a little wiggling. He shimmied under the fallen beam and entered the crumbling building, hoping it didn't choose today of all days to fall. Inside the barn was damp and musty, and an odor he couldn't quite place lingered heavy in the air. The adjacent wall to his left was blown open, and through the hole he could see the vast fields of grain rolling lazily in the calm breeze as the forest loomed in the distance. The floor was covered in dirt and brown hay, with bits of dust and bugs scattered about. The rafters were exposed, and some of the roofing panels were missing. He looked up at the gray sky and sighed as dust fell on his face. Will we ever actually fix this barn? He shook his head and brushed the dust from his face. He thought it a good idea to move in case the dust was a preamble to a much louder collapse. He moved to the center of the room and quickly uncovered the trap door, a heavy piece of dark wood with holes and probably termites. He lifted the door with a small struggle and peered into the hole it revealed. The tunnel below looked uninviting, but it was familiar to him. It was also definitely the source of the smell. He grimaced and covered his nose with his sleeve, although it didn't help much. He paused and looked around, ensuring no prying eyes had seen him open the hidden door, then quietly slipped through the hatch and closed it behind him. So that was Chapter 1, and we do have time for Chapter 2, so we'll continue. Bang, bang, bang! The noise resounded through the crooked and rickety house, and the planks on the door shook violently. A brutish man was banging on the door with a meaty fist. He was clad in keenly polished armor that reflected the early sun's rays, making him look majestic, although it did nothing for his demeanor. Despite his certainty that the occupants were home, there was no answer, nor could he hear any movement inside the house, and his patience was already running quite thin. A vein popped in his forehead as the blood rushed to match his rising temper. "Open up! By order of General Eco of Cantor, your commander and leader, I demand you open this door at once!" The man stood tall and broad, covering most of the doorway, He pounded again with the force of 10 men, yelling as he did, "Open up, I say!" Inside the house, 2 women were moving a piece of furniture into the kitchen as quietly as possible. They struggled to get the awkwardly shaped island out of the living room, around the corner, and into the kitchen, where they maneuvered it so it could sit perfectly on top of the trap door. Their work was complicated by the wooden toys that littered the hallway. The man pounded on the door again. "I swear, if you do not open this door," he bellowed, while loudly drawing his sword, "I will be forced to knock it down." The women finished their task and generated some sounds of movement to appease the hulking brute. The younger woman approached the door and waited for her slightly older companion to hide against the kitchen wall. She was not much taller than Miyami. Her long, silky black hair followed her every move, and her voice fell sweet on friendly ears. When her companion was out of sight, she opened the door and stood dwarfed by the man in stature, but not in spirit. "What business do you have with my master's estate?" she demanded, as her emerald eyes pierced his. With unwavering spirit she continued, "Surely you received our tribute. What more do you want?" Normally the man would barrel through the door, his soldiers funneling through after, but not this time. Something about this one told him there was more than met the eye. "There was a problem with the shipments," he addressed her rudely, still clutching his sword. "We're conducting searches on all suspects. Stand aside, and this will be rather painless for you and your masters." The soldiers behind him grew restless and scanned the fields surrounding them. All they could see were half-harvest fields of depressed grain, which is what worried them. They had been briefed on last night's attack, and the general was fairly certain the farmers were responsible. Greca Farm was one of only a select few farms that had been told the carriage route, and the general was anxious to close in on the culprits before they ruined the festivities. Sharing his soldiers' sentiment, the captain moved closer to the door. "We'll be searching the farmland now. Perhaps it would be best for you to return when the master is here, as he would be better able to assist you." She tried to close the door, but his foot found it first. She glared at him again, but this time he would not be intimidated by someone so small. After all, he was captain of the 14th Regiment of the General. What kind of example would it set if he were turned away by a tiny woman? He grit his teeth, then grabbed her and bound her hands. He needed some help from his men, as she convincingly feigned a struggle, then eventually quieted and allowed herself to be taken. They left the porch, and he instructed 3 of them to take her away. The men tied her to a rope and pulled her along roughly, causing her to trip and stumble over her own feet. It took everything she had to restrain a twisted smile as they led her down the path and away from the house, and from the rest of their group. So that was chapters 1 and 2. I try to, like I said at the beginning, I try to keep these streams and videos rather short. And it's been 15 minutes. I think we'll cut that here, and tomorrow we'll do chapters 3 and 4. Yeah, chapters 3 and 4. And again, if you missed, there was a prologue to this book. If you missed it, it is on my YouTube channel. And if you missed this live stream, this will also be on the YouTube channel once the video is done processing. So, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, send me a message, add me on Reddit, or leave me a comment on the video on YouTube. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy your day. I will probably do some creative writing stuff tomorrow as well, or the next day, once I can figure out how to get my broadcasting software for Reddit isn't working. Once I can figure out how to get that working, I'll do some more creative writing, and probably some more programming too. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the story so far. Yeah, thanks.